The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost, it's lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
President Trump lays it down for 2020. Free markets versus socialism. Which belief system will prevail? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. In what could be a watershed for his presidency, or at least his first term, President Trump delivers his State of the Union address to widespread approval by the American people. And just 2 days later, the Democrats lay out a full-on socialist program to transform the entire American economy. We will touch on the president's address, the latest on a deal to keep the government open beyond next Friday's deadline, and we'll tell you all about the Green New Deal, arguably the most radical proposal ever introduced in Congress. And in a national capital embroiled in scandal, we'll discuss one of the most overlooked but gigantic scandals and cover-ups in the history of Congress with Luke Rosiak, author of a new book on the Pakistani Isram Awan and how he gained access to the computer files of more than 30 Democrat members of Congress and the spy novel intrigue and corruption that followed. And LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza joins us for Talkin' Liberty.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We've commenced the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. Socialism. It's been a long time since that word was uttered in a State of the Union address, but in President Trump's 80-minute stem winder before a joint session of Congress Tuesday night, Trump addressed the growing socialist movement within the Democratic Party.
Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country. We are born free, and we will stay free.
So how did Trump's State of the Union go over with the American people? Well, the ultimate anti-Trump media outlet, CNN, was forced to place all kind of caveats on an instant poll that revealed high marks for the president.
I just want to stress here that for a State of the Union address, the president's partisans, his supporters, tend to turn out to watch the speech. This is true of a president of either party. So tonight, we saw a heavily Republican-skewed audience turn out to watch the president's speech. But look at this, a very positive reaction from those who watched the speech tonight. 59% very positive, 17% somewhat positive, 23% negative.
Oh boy, trouble for CNN. But that didn't stop the Trump-deranged CNN leftists from trashing the speech. Here is Van Jones.
I saw this as a psychotically incoherent speech with cookies and dog poop. He tries to put together in the same speech these warm, kind things about humanitarianism and caring about children. At the same time, he is demonizing people who are immigrants in a way that was appalling.
Demonizing cookies and dog poop. And it's no wonder he said that, given that Trump delivered perhaps his most masterful address, which will serve as a marker, an opening statement for the 2020 presidential campaign. As the question persisted throughout the week of whether Democrats will ever agree to President Trump's border wall, there were indications of some cracks in the Democrats' resistance. The third-ranking Democrat in the House, James Clyburn, was asked if he would be willing to support some kind of wall.
Yes, so long as it's smartly done. Listening to the experts, I don't think we ought to put ourselves in the place of the experts. I've said that we ought to have a smart wall. I've defined that as a wall using drones to make it too high to get over, using X-ray equipment to make it too wide to get around, and using scanners to go deep enough not to be able to tunnel under it. Now, that, to me, would be the smart thing to do.
That is about the most fair and coherent Democrat response to Trump's initiative we have yet to hear. And Democrat Congressman Henry Cuellar, who represents a Texas district along the southern border, said he might support a wall if it's called an enhanced barrier.
First of all, we're not going to have a wall. Now, can we look at some sort of enhanced barrier? That's something we can certainly look at. But I have to say, living on the border, you have to let the local Border Patrol chief have the say-so and let the local communities be involved so they can come up with maybe some sort of enhanced barrier. But again, Washington cannot dictate what sort of barrier and where to put it at.
So semantics are everything when it comes to the wall. Wall, bad. Enhanced barrier, maybe okay. Meanwhile, what's happened to the political leaders of Virginia has become the stuff of legend, and not in a good way. I mean, you couldn't make up the metastasizing scandal in the Old Dominion. First, there were the two people in KKK getup and blackface discovered on Governor Ralph Northam's page from his medical school yearbook 35 years ago. He apologized for it one day, then denied that he was in the picture the next day, but revealed that he did, in fact, dress up like Michael Jackson. Then the Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax, all set to ascend to the governor's office, was accused of sexual assault 15 years ago. And then the third in line for governor, Attorney General Mark Herring, admitted that he, too, dressed up in blackface almost 40 years ago. Oh, what a tangled web. And the one who appears in the most trouble is Lieutenant Governor Fairfax, the only one of the trio of disgraced Virginia leaders to be accused of an actual crime, and whose future became even more clouded when one of the leading Democrat presidential candidates, Kamala Harris, oh so reluctantly called for an investigation.
I think that the letter written by the woman reads as a credible account, and I think there should be an investigation to get to the bottom of it and determine the facts.
Wow, that was painful for her, obviously. But given what she and other Democrats did to Brett Kavanaugh in l'affaire Christine Blasey Ford, she was left with little choice. Meanwhile, Pocahontas, the fake Indian and fake normal folk, Senator Elizabeth Warren dug an even deeper hole for herself this week after her disastrous DNA test revealing that she's actually less Indian than the average American and saying she had never used her fake Indian heritage to her advantage. Her Texas bar application from the 1980s was uncovered, showing that she listed her own identity as American Indian, and she stumbled trying to explain it away.
Why did you list yourself as an American Indian on this Texas bar application?
So this was about 30 years ago, and I am not a tribal citizen. Tribes and only tribes determine citizenship. When I was growing up in Oklahoma, I learned about my family the same way most people do. My brothers and I learned from our mom and our dad and our brothers and our sisters, and those were our family stories. But that said, there really is an important distinction of tribal citizenship. I am not a member of a tribe. And I have apologized for not being more sensitive to that distinction.
Note that she never actually answered the question. So if she wasn't already, Elizabeth Warren has now officially become a laughingstock. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss arguably the most radical idea ever proposed in American history, the Green New Deal.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
With the 2020 presidential race already in high gear, the Democratic Party has been advocating policies that are truly radical. Medicare for all would eliminate the private sector from the nation's healthcare system and shift control to the federal government. But far more radical is the left's so-called Green New Deal, named after FDR's New Deal during the Depression. It's an idea advocated by several Democratic presidential candidates and could, in fact, be the most radical legislative proposal ever introduced in Congress. And it's the brainchild of the 29-year-old socialist sensation known as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Today is the day that we truly embark on a comprehensive agenda of economic, social, and racial justice in the United States of America. Climate change and our environmental challenges are one of the biggest existential threats to our way of life.
But lest you think the Green New Deal is just a way to reduce America's carbon footprint, allow me to inform you of the full scope of this proposed legislation, which is actually an aspirational bill, long on radical goals and short on specific ways to achieve them. The Green New Deal is designed to address a lot more than just climate change. It seeks to ban affordable fossil fuel-based energy, eliminate nuclear energy, gut and rebuild every building in America, guarantee jobs for all Americans, guarantee government-funded health care and a government-provided home, food, and a guaranteed income, even those who are, and this is a direct quote from the legislation, unable or unwilling to work. It even seeks to eliminate 99% of cars and eliminate 100% of air travel. This idea represents nothing less than a full-scale transformation of the American economy. It was first advocated by the Green Party in the 2016 election, but when it was introduced by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she wrote to her fellow members of Congress that her proposed legislation is a, quote, national, social, industrial, and economic mobilization at a scale not seen since World War II, unquote. Presidential candidates Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, and likely candidate Bernie Sanders have all endorsed this Green New Deal, with other Democratic candidates likely to follow suit. On the other hand, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, considering the radical nature of the proposal in light of the 2020 presidential election, sloughed it off as a green dream. And Ocasio-Cortez said, sure.
I think it is a green dream. And I think that it is. And I think that all great American programs, everything from the Great Society to the New Deal, started with a vision for our future.
Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, who's co-sponsoring the resolution with Ocasio-Cortez, sees this as the start of something big.
All issues go through three phases: political education, political activation, political implementation. So you're seeing the beginning of the education and activation phase, and ultimately we're going to have the legislative implementation phase of this program as well. This is now a voting issue across the country. The green generation has risen up, and they are saying that they want this issue solved. And they want the people who work in this building and occupy the White House to solve this problem.
So let's drill down just a bit on the details of this Green New Deal. The central goal is national net zero greenhouse gas emissions within 10 years. Now, those who embrace the theory of catastrophic climate change believe that the coming climate-based disasters can be avoided by reducing the world's carbon footprint. Thus, this program would eliminate all the fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, which generate power for the vast majority of Americans. But developing nations with high-growth economies, primarily China and India, will still be leaving massive carbon footprints of their own, begging the question of just how much difference America's program would make as one of 200 nations in the world. The Green New Deal would also guarantee jobs for all Americans, including those, as I mentioned earlier, quote, unable or unwilling to work. Seriously. Advocates claim the full employment component of this program would create 25 million new jobs in the transformation to a future based on 100% renewable energy. Under this legislation, the federal government would guarantee not just employment for every American, but also the right to a, quote, living wage, government-provided health care, and government-funded education from pre-K through college. Oh, and there's also a government-guaranteed income for every American. The Green New Deal is estimated to cost at least $7 trillion, a very rough estimate. And as yet undetermined is the increased cost to individual households for heating their homes, driving their cars, and the many other things which require energy. How would the cost be covered? The proposed legislation would do it entirely through the federal government, of course, using a combination of the Federal Reserve, a new public bank or system of regional and specialized public banks, and public venture funds, whatever those are. But there's a fundamental problem. Renewable sources of energy are incapable of producing the power necessary for many industrial tasks. While solar power and wind power are readily available, they are insufficient to drive a jet engine or power an industrial plant. So how would we avoid massive disruptions in commerce and transportation with this Green New Deal? Those questions are as yet unanswered. Most Americans do embrace the ideal of renewable, environmentally friendly energy. But at what cost and to what end? As we've demonstrated, the Green New Deal is about a lot more than just reducing carbon emissions. The program would result in the virtual elimination of the current American systems of energy, banking, and commerce to be replaced by programs run solely by the federal government. We'll take a quick break and come back to talk with the author of a new book on one of the biggest and most overlooked scandals in the history of Congress.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel because
Truth
is
making a comeback.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Scandal in Washington. On one side, accusations of collusion between Trump and Russia. On the other, claims that innocent Trump campaign operatives were drawn into an FBI trap to trigger an unfounded investigation. But if you think you've got a handle on all the scandals pervading the D.C. swamp, think again. There was another truly scandalous turn of events involving Congress that flew mostly under the radar in the heat of the 2016 presidential campaign. And it's like something out of a spy novel. An unvetted Pakistani national given to blackmail gained access to the computer files of more than 30 Democrats in the House of Representatives. And we'll bring in the author of a new book on this scandal to complete the narrative. Luke Rosiak is an investigative reporter at the Daily Caller and author of Obstruction of Justice, How the Deep State Risked National Security to Protect the Democrats. And he joins us now. Mr. Rosiak, welcome to Liberty Nation Radio.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. If you would pick up the story of Imran Awan from where I just left off and tell us why many are calling this the biggest scandal in the history of Congress.
That was a great intro. This guy is an IT guy for Congress for many years. He was working for Debbie Wasserman Schultz and other members of Congress. And in the heat of the 2016 election, actually the same week that the DNC was hacked, Congress's own internal police caught him hacking Congress. And so although he was the IT guy, he was taking data, much more data than he should have had access to, impersonating members of Congress and logging into their accounts and so on, and funneling data off the House network and taking steps to hide what he was doing. So obviously, especially with the context of what was going on in the DNC, this was a huge deal. And yet, no one ever heard about it for months and months and months. And even after that, you never heard anything about it. So it turned out, after I pulled the thread on this for 2 years and found everywhere I looked, literally just James Bond stuff, just the absolute most wildest things. This guy was taking money from an Iranian government minister and laundering it through a French company called CIA LLC. After he was banned from Congress, he had a back door into the House network because he was impersonating an intelligence staffer. And the list goes on and on. And so they kicked the can down the road until after the election. And they let him continue to log in Congress this whole time while they're building this Russia narrative. And after the election, they still don't want this to really go public. So they kick him off the network and they fire him, but they don't arrest him. And that's when I find out that he's still got access. He goes into Debbie Wasserman Schultz's office at midnight, takes her laptop after he's been banned from Congress and leaves it in a phone booth. So as I said, truly this is a surreal tale, and it's as I investigated it, I just couldn't believe what I was learning, and yet the American public, this was concealed from.
Did Mr. Awan have so much on so many Democrats that there was a great hesitancy to really bring down the full weight of the law on him?
I think actually that's what he himself said. So a couple of reasons why they wanted this to go away. The first is the Russian narrative. They didn't want this competing hack involving Pakistanis that they had failed to vet. And there were a series of very embarrassing missteps by the Democrats that allowed this to happen, and incompetence. And then the other thing is what you just said. I mean, this guy had access to everything. And I think there was the worry that he would release it if they didn't kind of make this thing go away. And so his own wife goes to the FBI and says, my husband told me that he's a mole in Congress from Pakistan. He told me that he knows so much that he can never be prosecuted, so it's okay. And then she says, I'm going to go to the FBI. And he goes, well, I've been surveilling you. I've got videotape of a sex tape, and I'm going to release that in Pakistan if you come forward. So here we are. This is the guy hacking Congress, and he's caught, and he starts blackmailing people to prevent them from going to the FBI. His stepmother comes forward, and it's virtually the identical story. She says, I've been held in captivity by this guy to prevent me from coming forward. He said he's going to have my family killed in Pakistan, and they basically intimidate this woman, and witnesses are scared, evidence starts disappearing, and really this remarkable cover-up is in full swing.
Our guest is Luke Rosiak, author of Obstruction of Justice, How the Deep State Risked National Security to Protect the Democrats. Now, this scandal went, as you said, relatively unnoticed because it came to a head in the heat of the 2016 presidential campaign. Do you think it would have been in the headlines and stayed there for some time if it happened at another time? Or would it have been written off like all the revelations about the FBI's covert investigation of Trump, which we now know began before the presidential election?
That's an interesting question because the media is a big part of this story, isn't it? I mean, and what I basically learned through the reporting of this is I approached it first as what I just said, this remarkable national security story that I thought surely everyone would be interested in. I'd have the Washington Post, right behind me, following my leads. And soon I saw that no one was looking. And I would write these stories, and I would say, look at the court documents from civil court, look at these government records, these photographs, all this proof and all this evidence. And there was, basically just a campaign of concealment, and the media gladly went along with it. And they kind of bought the idea of fake news. You can just kind of say that now whenever it's convenient. Politicians can get away with a lot by just saying, it's fake news, and they do that on both sides, of course. And then the other thing is really just the lack of investigative reporting, especially when it's not something that a lot of the media is interested in. And it just turned out that, as you said, there was a much bigger appetite for this Russia story that is really kind of running on fumes here. No one can tell us exactly who with the Trump campaign did what with Russia, but the media is very, very interested. Meanwhile, we've got direct evidence, and this is, investigators on Capitol Hill. The Capitol Police wrote a memo saying that after they caught this guy hacking Congress and actually hacking a particular server called the House Democratic Caucus server, the Capitol Police wrote a memo saying that server disappeared. It's like, holy cow, a server, an important Democratic server, disappeared while it's evidence in a hacking probe. This is huge stuff. It's documented by government investigators, and the media had no appetite in it. And so ultimately the Democrats kind of work the FBI, and the FBI goes along with making this thing go away despite all the evidence. And then the media says, no need to look into this. The FBI says there's nothing there. And so my book documents, and the readers can see for themselves and judge for themselves, what happened on Capitol Hill with this Pakistani hack and the frightening ties to foreign governments and the track record of blackmail, and then the FBI basically conspiring to rig a political case. And so most people, as you say, they haven't even heard of this Imran Awan case, and it's a fascinating read in my opinion. But the other thing that's really important for people to learn from it is it shows you how they work behind the scenes to manipulate what we hear about and manipulate the system of justice here in America.
What conclusions have you personally drawn from your extensive research about the pervasiveness or lack thereof of official corruption in Washington?
I'm shocked by how corrupt Congress is. And I've been an investigative reporter here in Washington for a decade, and I've seen a lot, but the cynicism on Capitol Hill and the willingness to put personal reputation above all else. And, this may not sound, maybe everyone's saying, yes, we already know that, but this particular case, it kind of underscored, I saw things with my own eyes that were shocking.
Mr. Rosiak, many thanks for joining us today, and good luck with the book.
Thank you so much.
Luke Rosiak, author of Obstruction of Justice, How the Deep State Risked National Security to Protect the Democrats. Quick break, and then we're back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have reached the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin' Liberty, as we explore threats and promising developments regarding your individual liberty with LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
Okay, let's talk about the Covington kids and young Mr. Sandman in particular. They're not taking the nasty things that were said about him and them in the media they're not letting it just pass over them. They're taking legal action.
There were over 100 notices sent out by Mr. Sandman's attorneys this week to various publications and celebrities for their Twitter publications, indicating a sort of a spoilage notice, or do not destroy. If you're an attorney and you're going to sue a store for something that one of their employees did, you may say, hey, I'm going to sue you, so do not destroy the videotapes from December 25th, all right? Or I'm going to sue you, so make sure that you preserve them. So even in the course of, not actively trying to destroy them, but take affirmative steps to preserve this evidence. Those are the letters that went out. And I make that point, Tim, because it does cost a bit of money to sue someone. It can cost, many thousands of dollars in federal court to file a lawsuit. So if you're going to do 140 of those, that's no small thing.
Does he have a GoFundMe campaign to help his legal expenses?
I haven't seen one yet, but maybe that's next in the offing. But he will have to prove, and this is what I think it's an important story. So people can say something that's wrong. In other words, if you see a story on the news that says Nick Sandman taunted a Native American man, and we now know that that's not just not true, but it's a lie. It was calculated as a lie.
It's the opposite of the truth.
Absolutely right. So if you said that, though, and didn't know it was a lie, then you're not guilty of libel or slander. It's only if you knew or should have known that you're guilty. And so it's an uphill battle for these attorneys. I think that there are probably some media outlets and some people who have tweeted who do actually likely fall within the context of defamation, classically defined. And we'll see, they're probably going to say that because Sandman is a public figure, or so public, he became what's called a limited purpose public figure, and so that therefore they should be held to the even higher standard of where they actually know that it's incorrect and published it anyway, which is almost impossible to establish. And so that's the battle that we see before us. And also Gavin McInnes, from one of the famed co-founders of Vice News, filed suit this week against the Southern Poverty Law Center, and for a defamation suit against the Southern Poverty Law Center. And they had him and his organizations listed on their, I guess it was, I don't know if it was like the terror watch list or the, that sort of a thing, domestic hate type groups.
Right.
And I think that his case is actually a fairly strong one. We'll see as it goes forward. I'll continue to report on it. But his case has actually been filed.
Bad news for drivers. Oh, my goodness. How many of us rely on the Waze app to warn us of when there are police checkpoints coming up? But the New York Police Department, is that New York State or New York City?
NYPD, Tim.
The New York City, NYPD.
They have a keen hatred for the liberty of the people.
And they are saying to Google that they need to stop revealing the location of police checkpoints on Google's Waze app. And who even knew that Waze was owned by Google? But Google Maps and Waze are owned by the same people, and they're being told to cease and desist from identifying police checkpoints. A threat to liberty, Scott?
You can send your copy of the Constitution to Acting Deputy Commissioner for Legal Matters Ann Prunty at One Police Plaza in New York City. Yes, it's Tim, it's a complete abridgment of freedom of speech. All this police checkpoint awareness is one person saying, I see a police checkpoint on First Avenue at whatever street, and then posting that online, and then them distributing that post to other people who can then read. Right, and then,
but Scott, this is going to make a serious.
It's going
to make a serious dent in the income of the New York
for once.
City
it would be nice
Department.
To see one of these commissioners or police officers have to pay for their mistake instead of what they usually do is crushing the rights of the citizenry, and then a long time later, after it's been litigated out, the city has to pay through the nose to compensate the people who have successfully sued for having their rights crushed, and then the taxpayers take it because they have to then fund the settlements. It's so that's what the NYPD's up to these days.
Now, we move south to the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, where the U.S. attorney is suing to stop the first in the nation supervised drug injection site.
Tim, Philadelphia has a massive problem with heroin overdose deaths. In fact, it has it's the worst city in the country of its size. I think they had 1,200 about deaths last year. And some years ago in Vancouver, another North American city with a profound problem with overdose deaths of heroin, they did this safe injection site, which is sort of like a retail store where people go in. They don't buy heroin there, but they use the heroin that they have bought somewhere else there. And it's a place where these addicts can get access to social services. They can make sure that nobody's going to, use violence to try to steal their drugs, and also that they have reduced overdose deaths massively because they have the capacity to treat them right there in that central facility. So this was adopted in Philadelphia with the support of the mayor, the district attorney, who is in fact a progressive district attorney, unlike some other people who have claimed to be progressive district attorneys in the past. And unfortunately, U.S. Attorney William McSwain is trying to put the kibosh on this.
Okay, a federal judge has ordered prosecutors to release redacted copies of the search warrants that justified the raids on Michael Cohen, famously Donald Trump's fixer. Why was this done?
Well, a lot of media organizations sued to get the information released. We want to know what was the reason that justified these searches. And we'll get an affidavit of probable cause, which will lay out a lot of details and help sort of flesh out the story. The same reason, by the way, why the powers that be don't want this information released. It may tell us much information about the investigations into Mr. Cohen and then subsequently President Trump. So that's the reason why. But I think it's incumbent on the authorities to release this information. The judge has given them until, I think, the end of the month to produce a redacted copy. So it won't be without redactions. There are certain classified and other information that won't appear on them. But we have the potential to learn a great deal, Tim. I think this is sort of kind of like a huge story that's just blooming right now. It could be a great deal of information to be released at the end of the month on the Mueller case, because we'll learn potentially why they were able to get that warrant to get into. Now, let's recall, this is, you said fixer, but just so everybody remembers, it was his attorney. He was the president, before he was president, he was Donald Trump's attorney. So one of them. So it was,
but he was used primarily as a fixer.
I don't want you to soft sell the attorney-client relationship, though. That's what I'm pressing on, and it is an extraordinary act for police to search an attorney's office for business records.
Meanwhile, few people in the country, and almost no politicians except other ones in his own state, is more embattled than Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, who was thought to probably resign after all the revelations about the KKK hood and the blackface and all the rest of it. But he found enough time to sign a bill this week authorizing $750 million in cash subsidies to Amazon.
I just think it's gross that the most profitable and successful company the world's ever known, Tim, is being given this giant subsidy supported by Republicans and Democrats alike. And the way they do it is even more vulgar. They don't have the decency to just say, we'll give it to Amazon. They create this bill that's drafted only to apply to Amazon. So it says, if you have a technology company and you spend billions of dollars in this zip code by these years and create X number of jobs in this place, then you're entitled to these $500 million and then another $250. So it's a giveaway to a private company. And I think that when the legislators and the governor thinks that they know how to pick winners and losers in the marketplace, it's time for them to get into the capital markets and get out of legislating and governing. It's an entirely different thing, and that's not what we put them there for or what they're qualified to do.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, with me and Scott and Lisa K. Donner, are available to you on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.